Okay, so now we're going to look at, it's called reflexive pronouns. So reflexive pronouns means when you have an action, but it's like happening back onto you. So using your reflexive pronouns, you'll say words like myself, yourself, himself, herself, themselves, ourselves. So it's those pronouns. We're not using subjects like I, you, he, she, it, we, they. You're using myself, yourself. How do we do it and why? So when you have a possessive adjective, it's using it to talk about an action. As I said, like if you listen to this sentence, I can test myself. So the action is to test. So you're putting that action onto you. I can test myself. Yeah, yeah. I think it's all good. Yeah. I can test myself um, whenever I get a quiet moment. I think that's what we had one of the tips was when you're learning English to learn vocab and just test yourself. Say the words out aloud. So if I said that sentence, I test myself, you could see that the subject is I, the verb is test, and then who am I doing the test to? It's back onto me. So I'm testing myself. We can use a sentence like something like another example is if you have a look here, they themselves. So we say they for themselves. So they means when you're talking about like a group of people. So you could say they gave themselves gifts. Maybe some people were giving each other, gifts. So they're doing that action onto themselves. They gave themselves gifts. If it's herself, it would come from the subject she. So, for example, she taught herself how to speak English. So you could see the subject, she, and then the action, taught, that's the past of teach. And then who did she teach? Herself. So she did the action back onto herself. So you say she taught herself. And we use we. If I'm in the subject as well, I would say, for example, my husband and I, we bought ourselves a new house. So you could see what was the action? We bought, that's to buy, but in the past. And then what did we buy? A house for ourselves. So we're doing that action so we were the subject, we bought ourselves a house. So the action is back onto us. And yourselves is when there's a group of people like yourselves, like you can you please all sign yourselves in? So if I'm asking a group of people to make sure that they, log in or that they sign in, I will say, can you please sign yourselves in? So that comes from the you, but plural, like I'm talking to many people. Can you all please sign yourselves in? Can you all please bring yourselves somewhere? Himself comes from him. So again, it's a male. So maybe he prepared for himself some notes. Okay, so he is the subject. I'm talking about a person. What did he do? The verb is prepared. He prepared for himself some notes. So the action is coming back onto him. He is the subject doing the action, but then the action is happening to him. Not just his doing the action, but it's happening to him. That's why we call these reflexive pronouns. It's not just the subject, verb, I did this action, I am doing this action, but I'm doing this action onto myself, onto herself, themselves, himself. And it is from the subject it. So maybe I'm talking about a cat or a dog, and I would say, look, the cat is licking itself, right? You would have heard that very common. Or the dog is playing with itself. So when the subject is an it, we say itself. So what is it doing? It's playing with who? With itself. So the action is happening back onto itself. So let's have a listen to some sentences with these reflexive pronouns, and you'll start to feel the idea that it's the subject that is doing the action, and who is the action happening to? It's happening to them, like it's coming back onto the same subject. If it's I, it would be myself. If it's you, yourself. If it's her, herself. If it's him, himself. If it's we, ourselves. And if it's they, theirselves. Okay, so let's have a listen to some sentences. And write down the sentences that you hear. So I'll play it once. And we can write down each sentence as you hear it. Remembering that these are reflexive pronouns. There is a subject, but there's also a reflexive pronoun, and it just has the S-E-L-F, self, myself, yourself, himself, herself, themselves. Just be careful because that's a plural, so S-E-L-V-E-S. Okay, so let's listen to, you're going to hear 6 sentences. Write them down. I will pause after each one. Okay, so 6 sentences.
4.20. 1. She's cut herself. You.
Okay, so what did we hear? She's cut herself. I'll play that one again. Make sure you write these sentences down.
4.20. 1. She's cut herself. You.
So she has cut. Who did she cut? Herself. She's cut herself. Okay, so very simple sentence. She cut herself. That's in our example. You can see here, she's cut herself. And then it wants to say you've
cut yourself.
But then if you did it, you've cut yourself. Okay, that's number 1. They did it for us. Let's listen to number 2. Write down the sentence.
I'm teaching myself Spanish. He.
So she's teaching herself Spanish. She said, I'm teaching myself Spanish. But now you're going to write he's teaching.
He's teaching himself Spanish.
But he is teaching himself Spanish. Good. Number 3.
3. We introduced ourselves. They.
So the first one is we introduced ourselves. So that's when you have the subject of we. That means I am a part of that subject. Or they, what can you think will be they introduced?
They introduced themselves.
So make sure you have they introduced themselves. Number
They introduced themselves.
Yeah. Number 4.
4. He taught himself to play the guitar. She.
So the first one is he taught himself to play the guitar, but now we want to say she. We're talking about another person. So she taught, what would you say? She taught?
She taught herself to play the guitar.
Is that what you got too, Sandra? She taught herself.
Yeah.
Good. How to play the guitar. Number 5.
He often talks to himself.
So the first one was he often talks to himself, but now I want to talk about me as a subject. So I often talk to.
I often talk to myself.
I often talk to myself. So I'm doing that action onto me, myself. And the last one, let's have a listen.
6. I really enjoyed myself last night.
So that's, I really enjoyed myself last night. So you can see the same subject must be with the same reflexive pronoun. So I really enjoyed myself last night, but now we want to say we. So if I'm talking about me and maybe my husband or me and my friends, we really enjoyed.
We really enjoyed ourselves last night.
We really enjoyed ourselves last night. So that's reflexive pronoun.